Tonight, the Supreme Court case that could blow up the congressional map, the Scorsese of Oppo research, and vegans take the pitch. Facebook announced a revamp of its privacy and security settings today in an attempt to diffuse complaints over how it's handled user data. The new steps include bringing all settings under one menu on its mobile app so controls are easier to find and use, making a new shortcuts menu specifically for privacy settings, and creating a tool called Access Your Information, where you can find and delete any data you don't want on the platform. Facebook also announced that it will update its terms of service in the coming weeks to clarify how it utilizes personal information. The young man who opened fire in a Quebec mosque last year, killing 6 men while they prayed, pleaded guilty today to 6 first-degree murder charges and 6 attempted murder charges. Alexander Bissonnette reversed his original not guilty plea to avoid a trial, saying he didn't want to make the victims' families relive the tragedy. A first-degree murder conviction in Canada carries a life sentence without the possibility of parole for 25 years. Bissonnette may have to serve his sentences consecutively. Thousands of people marched in Paris in honor of Maril Knoll, an 85-year-old Holocaust survivor who was murdered last week. Officials believe it's because she was Jewish. Some of the rally's attendees expressed concern that anti-Semitism seems to be on the rise in France. Fights broke out when former far-right presidential candidate Marine Le Pen showed up at the march. Her party, the National Front, has been accused of anti-Semitism, and France's leading Jewish groups specifically asked Le Pen not to come. Today, the Ecuadorian embassy in London, which has housed WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange for nearly 6 years, cut off his internet access. In a statement, Ecuador said it was because Assange's social media posts jeopardized relations with the EU, the UK, and other nations. WikiLeaks responded this evening, accusing the Ecuadorian government of trying to gag Assange over his stance on the Catalan separatist movement in Spain. Michigan State University paid a public relations firm more than $500,000 to track victims of the disgraced gymnastics team doctor Larry Nassar earlier this year, according to the lawyer who represented more than 140 of them. The PR firm's work included gathering information from victims' social media accounts and collecting and evaluating news coverage about their cases. More than 250 people have accused Nassar of sexually abusing them. The Lansing State Journal originally got the information through public records requests. MSU didn't respond to Vice News' request for comment. President Trump fired his embattled Secretary of Veterans Affairs today. Via tweet, David Shulkin had come under intense criticism for misuse of taxpayer funds and for performance issues in the VA system. He'll be replaced by Admiral Ronnie Jackson, the current White House physician, who gave a memorable press conference in January defending the president's health.
The president's overall health is excellent.
You could say he nailed the audition. Gerrymandering, the practice of drawing electoral districts to disenfranchise certain voters, was used for decades to strip black voters of their civil rights. The Supreme Court has ruled that that's unconstitutional. But gerrymandering is also used much more widely, by whichever party is in power in a given state, to dilute the power of the opposition. And this is an area where the Supreme Court hasn't reached a conclusion. But today, it heard arguments in a case that could change that.
The Supreme Court justices are pretty uniformly in agreement that gerrymandering is a bad thing. They just don't know what to do about it. Here's how Justice Samuel Alito put it in October, when the court heard its first gerrymandering case concerning Wisconsin's congressional maps.
Gerrymandering is distasteful, but if we are going to impose a standard on the courts, it has to be something that's manageable, and it has to be something that's sufficiently concrete so that the public reaction to decisions is not going to be that this three-judge court decided this way because two of the three were appointed by a Republican president, or two of the three were appointed by a Democratic president.
In other words, if the Supreme Court knocks down a map as unconstitutional because it's too partisan, they have to have a concrete standard that's equally applicable nationwide, so that other judges can use it to evaluate whether other maps are constitutional. The justices didn't seem totally convinced by the Wisconsin case, which proposed a mathematical equation to evaluate whether a map was too partisan. Chief Justice John Roberts called the equation, quote, sociological gobbledygook.
Stop the gerrymandering! We're tired of the tampering!
But today, they heard another option in Benesek versus Lamone, a challenge by Republicans to Maryland's Democratic-drawn congressional map. The case focuses on Maryland's 6th district. Before redistricting in 2010, nearly half of the district's registered voters were Republican, and it was represented by Republican Congressman Roscoe Bartlett for 2 decades. After the Democratic-controlled state legislature redrew the maps, partisan control of the district flipped, and Democrat John Delaney has represented it since. In Benesek versus Lamone, the plaintiffs are arguing that the map violates GOP voters' First Amendment rights because it was drawn in retaliation for their support for Republican candidates, and because it dilutes their political power in the area. They cite public statements made by Democrats in the state indicating they purposely drew the district to elect Democrats. When I sat in on the oral arguments today, though, the justices didn't seem like they were buying it.
I think they understand that this is a real problem for democracy, and the question is just whether they think they have the legal framework to get where they want to go with that. And on that question, I'm not sure.
But whatever happens in the Wisconsin or Maryland cases could have a huge national impact. If the Supreme Court sets a new standard by which to measure partisan gerrymandering, conceivably dozens of states could have their maps challenged in court. Couple scores of new congressional maps with presidential cycle level turnout, and you have a recipe for seismic changes coming to Congress in 2020, less than 3 years from now.
This is our target tonight, Dino Rossi. He's running for Congress.
Target
Is that's who we.
Is that official lingo?
I am a tracker.
You're a tracker.
I'm a tracker.
What's a tracker?
A tracker is someone who is paid by a campaign to go to that campaign's opponents' public events and record what they say, break down the messaging, get it back to the campaign.
What's that conversation like? Like you come up to somebody at a party, it's like, oh, hey, what do you do? I follow politicians and hope they say something racist.
That's one big misconception, is that we're trying to catch the bad thing.
That misconception started with something real. In 2006, George Allen was running for senator in Virginia. He was up 16 points in the polls. But then, during a routine stump speech, he singled out his tracker.
This fella here over here with the yellow shirt, Macaca, or whatever his name is, he's with my opponent. He's following us around everywhere.
The person he's pointing out is a young Indian-American college student who's born in Virginia.
Let's give a welcome to Macaca here. Welcome to America and the real world of Virginia.
Allen lost the race, and with it, his entire political career. Other candidates learned to avoid having their own macaco moments.
One of my biggest strategies is to show up about 90 seconds before the event's supposed to start. That lets me get in, get a seat, sit down without too much time for anybody to come and escort me out. How are you?
I'm good, you?
Good. It's a public building. It's an open meeting. You're having a PCO meeting.
You need to be in a certain area.
We can stand. No problem.
Don't
All good.
prepare to fight.
No worries. No, that's good. And if Dino's not coming, I can bounce too. Is he standing you up again? This is twice.
Oh, because of you.
If you pay a tracker with the expectation that this is an investment in getting my opponent to say something dumb, you're wasting your money.
So what is the point of paying the tracker then?
So you want to follow their message.
So you want to know what they said in the Rotary Club in a small town versus what they said to a union hall in a big city, because a lot of times that's different.
Zach has been trailing Dino Rossi for 8 years.
Thank you very much. So many friends in this room.
He's kind of like a spy for the Democratic Party, except everyone knows him.
I was worried I wasn't going to get a tracker during this campaign, and boy, would you get a makeover, Zach? Yeah, looking good. Yeah.
This is Zach's daily routine. Get up early, watch some Fox News, and then hit the road for a political event. It's not glamorous, and it doesn't pay much either.
Last time I was here, you had a different car.
I did. I've had 3 different cars since the last time you were here. That was,
3?
I buy them just for a couple of $100 on Craigslist, hoping that I can squeeze a few more months or hopefully years out of them. You spend about the same amount if you were to like keep diligent maintenance on a car, you know, with a good payment. I keep my AAA membership. I get the premium that gives you like 200 miles in towing. And
that's not what I want to hear when I start on a 4-hour car trip.
Right. Zach is headed from Seattle to Pasco to record Kathy McMorris Rogers, the highest-ranking female Republican in Congress. Democrats have targeted her ahead of the 2018 midterm elections.
She might not show up tonight.
We're driving 4 hours.
Yeah.
Over the mountains,
Yep.
in the snow.
Yep.
Lady might not be there.
Yep.
You out of your mind, dude. Like,
Zach is so prolific that at pretty much any Republican event in Washington, people recognize him the moment he walks in. So he hired a new trainee named Rachel to go in and run the camera for him.
So this will be a one that they probably won't let me into because I've been tracking them for a long time, so we're gonna have you go in.
Okay.
I'm gonna have you working with the handy cam because you'll probably be further in the back of the room.
okay.
If you get asked to leave, if someone comes up to you and says, "Hi, are you here for a political purpose?" You know, "Yes, I am." Well, you know what? It's a private room and we're just gonna go ahead and ask you to leave. Leave.
Hey, how you doing?
Sure enough, Kathy McMorris Rogers was a no-show. She was stuck in D.C. as Congress struggled, again, to keep the government open. Instead, she sent a pre-taped video message.
I join you in celebrating the American farmer tonight. And thank you to the Washington Policy Center for your friendship, your leadership on so many public policy issues.
How'd it go inside there?
It was boring.
Yeah, it's gonna happen. Yeah, you got some video of it? Got good video?
I got the whole thing. Got
Awesome.
15 minutes of it.
Awesome, cool. That's all we need. Great.
You feel good about this?
Hey, we got the capture.
Most people who do the work that you do, they're a lot younger. They do it for a little bit.
Yeah.
Out of college, they get out of the game.
Yeah.
Why are you still here?
I love it. I mean, I love what I do. I like the chase. When I can put that puzzle together, that turns all my lights on.
You just don't see yourself getting out?
As long as there's still people who think that they could just walk into a room and lie to whoever's in there, when they're saying one thing in one room and another, I'm still willing to show up in the room and stick a camera up their nose.
This is an historic moment from which there can be no turning back. Britain is leaving the European Union.
1 year ago, Britain pulled the trigger on Brexit, giving notice to the European Union that it was going to leave. On the calendar at least, it's now halfway there. Exactly a year from tomorrow, at 11 p.m. on the 29th of March 2019 to be precise, Britain will officially separate from the EU. That leaves 365 days to finalise the remaining details about how Brexit is actually going to work. There are 3 major phases of the split. Phase 1 is the divorce settlement, an agreement on what will and what won't be on the negotiating table, and exactly how much it will cost the UK to go. In December, the UK agreed to pay alimony, an estimated £40 billion to fund its existing commitments to European projects until the end of 2020. It's a huge sum, about equal to what the UK spends annually on national defence. This makes EU negotiators happy, and the Brexiteers who thought the whole point of the split was to stop funding the EU, less happy. Then there's the status of EU citizens currently living in the UK. They're mildly pleased. While most would prefer if Britain stayed inside the EU, they'll be able to claim permanent residency in their non-EU home. Phase 2 is a transition from Brexit to a new economic relationship between Britain and its former partner. This is a complicated bit, so last week, both sides did the easiest thing and kicked the details down the road by agreeing to keep trade status pretty much exactly as it is until the 31st of December 2020. The UK will be able to start negotiating new trade deals with non-EU countries, but until 2021, it'll also have to put up with the things the Brexiteers really dislike, like maintaining open borders for EU citizens and following EU regulations, including letting European companies fish in British waters. Once the UK actually leaves the EU trading bloc in 2021, not only does no one know what will happen, talks to figure it out haven't even started. The two sides have published a 130-page working draft on what the deal looks like so far. Marked in green is everything that has been agreed. Marked in yellow and white are subjects where there's no agreement. On paper, it looks like progress. About 3/4 of these pages are green. But the things they can't agree on are the same things they've disagreed on since day one, like jurisdiction of European courts in the UK, the exchange of classified information between intelligence services, and the stickiest one of all, Northern Ireland's relationship with the rest of Ireland, which will remain within the EU. We spoke to Gina Miller, who took the government to court last year over how it was going about Brexit.
It's an absolute shambles. I mean, it's taken them 12 months to do the really easy stuff in phase 1, and now we've got 7 months left. So don't be fooled by this idea that we have till March next year. We don't. We actually have 7 months to resolve not just the Irish border, but actually the deal we want.
Why? Explain that to me.
Because October would be the time when we go into a legal process called ratification.
What's the best scenario you can imagine?
I think the best scenario would be that the vote is put to Parliament in October and the MPs decide that this is such a big momentous decision that it goes back to the people.
But what's the worst case scenario you can imagine?
The worst case scenario is very possible that we leave with no deal and that we just crash out. And at the end of the transitional period, which hasn't actually solved the cliff edge, it's just postponed it for 20 months, that would be the most damaging thing we could do.
Last week, China announced it's already met its emissions targets for 2020, 3 years early. Given that China is the world's largest source of greenhouse gases, that should be a big deal. But if China's suddenly doing so well, why did we also learn last week that world emissions hit a record high in 2017? And who's to blame? The answer might still be China. When China pledged to tackle its emissions in 2015 at the Paris Climate Summit, it never set out to reduce its overall emissions. Rather, it pledged to reduce the carbon intensity of its economy, which essentially means how much carbon it emits per dollar as its economy grows. And it did that. China reduced emissions per dollar by a massive 46% from 2005 to 2017. But over that same period, the economy also grew massively. So total emissions grew too, by 1.7% in 2017. So even though China is showing it can successfully regulate its environmental impact, it's not enough to make a dent on a global scale. Talk about British football culture, and environmental conscientiousness probably isn't the first trait that springs to mind. But try telling that to Forest Green Rovers. The aptly named club has been based in a tiny English village for 129 years. For the last 8, they've been owned by wind power tycoon Dale Vince, who also owns a multi-million-dollar green energy company, Ecotricity. With his investment, the Rovers have won a place in England's professional leagues for the first time. They've also become the greenest sports team in the world. And they're completely vegan.
Over a year, we reckon about 20% of all of the electricity we use comes from our own solar panels, and the rest we bring in from the grid using our own windmills and solar panels in other parts of the country. So we're 100% powered by green electricity, and about 20% of it is made here on site. Yeah, Tom. Well, I would occasionally call myself a hippie. I would say more than anything else, if you're looking for a label, I'm an environmentalist. Sometimes people call me a businessman. I don't like that. I think that's mildly insulting. We've got a series of drains dug across the pitch, and we collect the water that falls on it, and we pump it up into a big tank up in the corner there, and put it back on the pitch later. So it's like a water cycle. One of the things we've done is to take the club vegan, and we are described often as the world's first or only vegan football club. And we did it for the environment reasons primarily, but of course there are human health reasons and animal welfare issues behind that drive to veganism as well, and I personally support all of those. First thing we did was stop the serving of red meat, and that went down, you could say, like a lead balloon with some people. It was a bit shocking, a bit controversial. Media called it a red meat ban. To our players, we said, look, this is a performance issue. Serious athletes don't eat red meat, and they took that on board.
We've done really well last season, and we were on a vegan diet around the football club, so this year it's all about staying in the league, and we're doing okay so far. When you first sign here, you hear a lot of things about the club and how it's run. It takes you a while to get used to it because it's completely different to any other football club. But when you're here, you really take it on board and you really understand with what he's trying to do. At the end of the day, they're trying to save the world.
2 seasons ago now, we just took the cow's milk away, and it was a little bit hard for a couple of people. They were like, well, what are we going to do, But, push comes to shove, I say, well, look, have a beer,
Are you trying to steal my limelight? Have you put the timer on? Fantastic. So, what we've got here, katsu curry, pickled vegetables, and pickled ginger. It's not typical football food, and actually there was some resistance. Naturally, it's changed, but sales have gone up. People have realised actually they're not being punished. You don't get punished with vegan food. It's actually a celebration of what we've got. Look at the size of that pie out there. You don't need Forest Green hungry.
Well, I think the classic stereotype of a football fan in England is going to be somebody that doesn't eat healthy food, perhaps isn't the most progressive in their outlook. I don't think it's actually holds true, like most stereotypes. And if you look at our fans, talk to our fans, you find that actually, once they're introduced to these ideas around the environment, they're very keen to pick them up and run with them, which is what our fans have been doing.
Oh, it's great, because we've been coming up about 3 or 4 seasons now, and all of a sudden, people know us for the vegetarian side of the club, so it's great. For a club this small to be talked about around the world is brilliant.
Football has given us a massive platform, undreamt of really, to talk to people all around the world. We've got fan clubs springing up in so many different countries of the world. It's quite incredible. And these are people that aren't necessarily football fans, but they are people that are concerned about the environment and are adopting Forest Green as a football club because of what we stand for off the pitch.
That's Vice News Tonight for Wednesday, March 28th.